we actually have our guest that I want to bring into the conversation. A conversation, to be quite honest, I've been trying to have on our show for some time, but because of scheduling conflicts with my friend Andrew Padilla, we weren't able to bring him or to have this conversation. But I want to bring on Carlos Barreros Polanco, who's joining us to discuss his work around Puerto Rico. And this morning, we are going to talk this situation about the power grid, the debt, the privatization of the electrical grid, and the ongoing protests, and honestly, all but crisis that's going on in Puerto Rico. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are you?
Hi, happy to be here. How's everyone doing?
Doing great, man. Pleasure having you. Help the people. Like we have a couple of clips that can contextualize the conversation, but could you just kind of help us to understand what's going on in Puerto Rico with the privatization or the partial privatization of the grid and the protests that are coming into reaction?
So Puerto Rico's electrical grid, the transmission and the distribution of the grid was privatized earlier this year, starting on June 1st. And since then, we've seen several increases in power with a marked decrease in the quality of the service we're getting. And as far as the protests go, there's been a mix of protests against the company that privatized the electrical grid and also against the Financial Oversight and Management Board, which is trying to pass a debt restructuring plan currently.
So help us to, I can see through all those things that you just said, because I've been following this story and studying these things for a while. I want to see if we can help the audience get a good visceral grasp of what's happening. Maybe you can help us understand better how we even got to this conversation. Give us some kind of background. How did they get here to the point of privatization? Because when we're talking about, this is a private company, this is a corporation who is now getting some financial benefit, but it's coming at the expense of the people there, and the people are subsequently protesting. Give us a little bit of the history there.
So for years, Puerto Rico had been incurring debts, trying to pay off government paychecks and just trying to pay for stuff in general. And then during the Obama-Biden term, they established the Financial Oversight and Management Board, and as part of their bid to restructure the debt, they kind of like influenced the Governor Rosselló, who was later ousted, to privatize this part of the electrical grid, and then LUMA Energy, which is the company that currently runs transmission and distribution, won that contract. And now they've taken over the privatization of the grid from the Puerto Rican Electric Power Authority, which was the public utility that used to control the entire system of the grid.
So we're at the transition point in Puerto Rico's infrastructure narrative, where you're going to the partial privatization phase, where now LUMA Energy, did I say that pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
LUMA Energy is a private corporation who's won a contract. Why is there a contract for bid in the first place? Why is something that was a public utility now being a privatized conversation? I mean, it's a contract now. Why?
Well, as I had said earlier, the Financial Oversight and Management Board was brought in to kind of deal with Puerto Rico's debt. And as part of that dealing with the debt, they influenced the government to sell that part of the electrical grid because supposedly it would help Puerto Rico deal with the debt. But from what we've seen, it just has only increased the debt and given us a worse service. Yeah.
There it is. That's the supposedly trickle down economics was supposed to trickle down, right? There's a lot of supposeds with these. I want to bring in Pastor Galloway. We were working to get a little something fixed on the back end there. Pastor Galloway, just jump into the conversation wherever it is that you see best.
Well, just saying hello. I got family in Ponce and Fajardo. So just, it hurts my heart to see this happening. And then, we had just gotten done talking with what happens when we begin to start to interfere and give oversight away from kind of publicly observed services with Flint, Michigan. And so we see a parallel between the two. What is some of the organizing that's happening on the ground? Like, what are some of the ways in which folks are reacting to this and trying to figure out how to marshal power to address the skyrocketing costs, because we saw this with Flint water, the skyrocketing costs that began the Flint crisis in the early 2000s. And now we have skyrocketing costs here. Again, looking down the line, what are some of the ways that people are organizing against it?
Well, on the ground, there are several groups that have been trying to fight the privatization since it was announced way back when, mainly consisting of the Electrical Workers Union, UTIER, which had been protesting for years. And on the day of when the transmission distribution kind of got shifted to LUMA, they did several protests at storage centers for equipment where they didn't let LUMA pass until they were kind of forced to leave. And now some UTIER workers are working for LUMA. Some have been distributed to other places. Others have sadly lost their jobs. But on the ground, there has been, I want to say, at least one protest every week against LUMA, against the Financial Oversight Board, trying to urge the government to cancel its contract with LUMA.
Man, this story really goes. There's so many components to how we got here. The one that you hear me striking at the most is the philosophical lie, the underlying lie, because and that's me saying it. You as a journalist, is the supposed theory that this was supposed to fix the debt price crisis. Now, Anthony, I think you'll probably, be with me as we question why that there's a debt crisis in the first place and the connection to colonial, all those problems. But I just kind of want to harp on the many lies that are told to us that we observe as fact. But when we get the data, it shows the exact opposite, because help me to understand, did LUMA do a good job at bringing down the debt crisis there in Puerto Rico?
So far, we haven't seen exact numbers, and that's part of this is a little bit of a separate conversation, but LUMA is currently embroiled in at least several lawsuits because they refuse to give information about the company to the court. And actually, just yesterday or the day before, I kind of getting my dates mixed up a little bit, a judge issued an order for the arrest of LUMA's CEO because they refused to hand over the documents. And
get the hell out.
Yeah. So today's Thursday, Tuesday, I want to say, although yesterday or the day before, they issued an order for arrest at about 9 a.m. And then people were searching for the CEO, Wayne Stensby, until they held a special hearing where Stensby's lawyers convinced the judge to suspend the warrant until Monday while they checked the documents that LUMA did give over to see if they fulfilled all the requirements. And that's what they're currently checking into.
My friend, excuse my expression, but Pastor Galloway, that connecting tapestry of doing the crime and then refusing to testify or to acknowledge a subpoena. This is a global thing. Pastor Galloway, get the last question in, and then I want to speak, or rather, just jump in there for me.
So, we have in this story the exacerbation of the problems with the electrical grid with the storm that came through. And so, in all of this embroiled back and forth, is the infrastructure actually being built? As we deal with the skyrocketing prices, is the actual infrastructure challenge being addressed at all?
Well, supposedly they're working on fixing, but we haven't seen a lot of that yet. Actually, when LUMA took over, we saw a spike in blackouts to the point where there was, I believe in early September, there was a point where about 19% of the island was without power, or 19% of the customers of LUMA were without power, which is a lot of people.
Carlos, so they're incompetent on top of everything else.
Yeah.
I know this may not be like, I'm the commentary guy. I know you're the journalist. Let's listen to this clip from Representative Katie Porter, and we also have a clip from Rashida Tlaib. I was going to end the conversation, but as you're talking, Pastor Galloway, you reminded me that there's some things that they're going to point out here. Let's take this first clip. Katie Porter.
How many blackouts have been reported since LUMA took over on June 1?
The system has a very large number of outages, Congresswoman, both
Can
before
you
and after.
count them? Is it so big you can't even keep track of them all?
There are outages every single day.
If you're having trouble doing this, and there's voltage spikes, destroyed appliances, house fires, complaints about customer service, why should LUMA be allowed to continue to manage the plant if it's not actually delivering electricity?
LUMA has nothing to do with the AES coal plant. Our job is to operate the electric system.
Do you not get energy from this plant that you then move along the grid?
Puerto Rico receives energy from that plant, yes.
And then you move it along the grid?
That energy is flowed through the grid to customers.
How long do you think it will be until LUMA can deliver the energy in a consistent and reliable way with blackouts that are comparable to what we see in the United States and what you saw at your prior employer?
I believe that it's going to take many years to transform all of Puerto Rico's electric system. It's going to require the FEMA funding, and it requires a complete overhaul. It took decades to get where we are today, and it's going to get better month by month by month. But frankly, it's going to take many years to get a world-class electric system here.
Carlos, we're running up on time, but I am just flabbergasted at the fact that the entire island of Puerto Rico is now at the mercy of the mediocrity of this corporation that's getting hundreds. I'm sure they're getting hundreds. They're talking about FEMA funding, so we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that they're going to have access to. Help me understand.
They were asking for, currently they're asking $10 billion in funding to do.
Magnitudes of order more.
Grid. Yeah, it's like they're getting tons and tons of money, but we haven't seen any market improvement. We've seen a marked decrease in quality that we're getting, which is why so many people continue protesting, continue kind of fighting to get this contract canceled, because we're just worried about being left in the dark permanently.
It's obscene. This is obscene. What can we do? We've kind of fleshed this out as much as we could in this time that we've had. What's the call to action, and how can we help?
Well, you could write to representatives on the National Resources Council of the United States, I believe, is the one who are handling LUMA Energy, and also Reps Katie Porter and Reps Rashida Tlaib are the ones who I've seen constantly dealing with Stansby and asking him the hard questions. And then also support people in Puerto Rico, kind of like boosting their voices like this, I think is a very good way to get the message out.
You know, Carlos, I keep trying to get away from it, but my producer is saying we got to hear this clip from Rashida Tlaib, because not only are we talking about incompetence, we're talking about salaries that they don't even want to disclose. Let's take a listen to this before we get out of here.
How many LUMA employees executives earn over $200,000, and how many earn over $500,000?
I think it was asked that question earlier, but
and you didn't want to answer, right?
I'm not able to disclose employee salaries.
Yeah. If you want to get in the business of providing a public good and for the federal government to subsidize it, or for us to play a part in it, then you understand that those salaries are also the public salary. Do you understand? So just know that it doesn't make sense that you don't want to reveal that. You don't even have to tell me the names of it. I think Velasquez and I are just curious, how many of your employees earn over 200,000 and how many of them earn 500,000? I don't need names. I just want to know how many. So if you can follow up and talk to your legal folks, I think they'll come back and tell you that should be actually transparent and open. Do you know what the median household income is in Puerto Rico?
No, I do not, Congressman.
Yeah, it's $20,000, according to the Census Bureau, $20,000. So LUMA has received millions of dollars and stands to receive billions more in an attempt to privatize the grid in Puerto Rico over the next 15 years. But the last 4 months have been a disaster for the people of Puerto Rico, and privatization, I know, will only worsen it. And the fact of the matter is you failed them just alone in the last 4 months. So please understand that my frustration with all of this is because they deserve to make sure that they have access to something that is very much a lifeline to medical issues they're struggling with, being able to provide for their families, of course, food, all those things, appliances, everything is so connected.
Brother Carlos, I wanted to get that clip in there. Listen, thank you so much for bringing this coverage and sharing this information with us. Tell everyone how they can get up with you.
Well, you can keep up with me on my Twitter at Vaquero2XL. It's right down the screen, VAQUERO2XL. And then I'll have an article later at LatinoRebels.com talking about Stensby, LUMA CEO Wayne Stensby's arrest warrant and how it kind of all went down.
Thanks so much for joining us, my friend. We have to have you back soon.
Happy to be here.
Take care.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Pastor Galloway, if you could, just for a few more minutes here, that conversation I almost was getting ready to go another layer deeper, because the connectivity with everything that's happening around us is just, it's just screaming at us.
And of course, there's the conversation around statehood and what would be in place and could be in place around that in that conversation. So yeah, the layers are upon layers are there. But you know, at the end of the day, we have U.S. citizens who are receiving this level of disservice and lack of public infrastructure in our country. And are we okay with that? This is one of the questions, and it's not just a question for Puerto Rico. It's a question for many different areas. My family in Hinton, West Virginia, in Appalachia, we've got places all across our country where folks, regardless of political party, regardless of race, are dealing with poor infrastructure. You know, and will this new infrastructure bill be something that can be used to address the U.S. citizens not having access to power in Puerto Rico? So there's a lot of layers here.
And then James, look, man, if we talking about power grids and getting some electricity up after the storms, man, I know some brothers. I know plenty of brothers who get power up after every hurricane down in South Florida around here. These white boys out here taking a whole island, taking in. Man, I think we might need to get into a new business, brother.
You terrible. I'm good.
You said you're not gonna climb. You ain't climbing up on no. You ain't climbing up on no post.
Nothing with no static shock in it. I'm good.
No, not us. But not us. But man, I know some of these country boys, man. Some of these country boys out here that would get this work done, and ain't no power grid going out because of no hurricane. And it's the incompetence of it. It's the fact that these guys have more power outages every day. It's a level of incompetence that we would not allow in anywhere, but yet they are awarded a contract to the tune of what they said, upwards of 10 billion if they get what they're asking.